Today on the podcast, we're talking about improv comedy. Where did it come from? Where has it been? And where the heck is it going? Talk about the golden era of improv, some of the most well-known films that are based entirely on the style, but we'll also look at the exact opposite, the films that stick entirely to the script. Which style is better? I want an answer. But most importantly, I want an answer to these questions. Is improv getting tired? Or perhaps it's already exhausted? Stay tuned. We're going to answer these questions right after this really awesome intro that's been designed specifically for this podcast. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Dave Huff.
And I'm Ryan George. That's it. You want more?
Esquire the Third.
From the hit TV show Touched by an Angel.
Acceptable answers were also Matlock.
I was in Matlock.
Today we are talking about improv comedy, Ryan. Let's kick this off properly, okay?
Yes, and?
Hit me with a location.
A cruise ship.
And an occupation.
Police officer.
Okay, sir, I'm going to need you to step back. Stop trying to recreate the famous scene from Titanic, please, sir. This is a family cruise ship. We're not allowed to have anything to do with Leonardo DiCaprio here.
Dave, what are you talking about?
That is improv.
And thanks for listening to today's podcast.
Make sure you hit the subscribe button.
I see what you did. I see it. You improvised.
There are rules to improv. And I'm not necessarily familiar with all of them, but those were some of them. Some fun improv games. When you think of improv, what do you think?
I think Whose Line Is It Anyway? Colin Mockery, Ryan Stiles,
yes,
Wayne Brady, and fourth guest.
Yes. Don't even mention Drew Carey.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Drew Carey.
But I think of Whose Line Is It Anyways as well. I also think of a lot of like famous movie scenes throughout the years that have relied heavily on improv. But when you think of Whose Line Is It Anyways, you think of those fun little games that they used to play. And a lot of it was throwing out random details of the scene that they were to create. And they just had to go with it.
Scenes from a hat, one of the best things of all time.
Of all time. And they would just go completely insane. Play a couple of those clips right now.
Hey, Cole. Yeah, right. Here's a little riddle for you. All right. What kind of bird always says the name of our next band?
Oh, I guess,
Tern? An Arctic tern? And what sound does an Arctic tern make?
Backstreet Boys?
That's so funny.
Like, where does your brain go to get that? So this is immediately what I think when I think of improv is that iconic duo to me.
So good.
I don't want to downplay Wayne Brady. I don't want to downplay some of the other crazy guests that they've had on there, but
he had like a different kind of talent. Ryan Stiles and Colin Mockery have like chemistry
they really
together.
Do. Yeah, it's on a level.
Like you said, they're a duo. You know, they're so good together.
But that's not what we're going to talk about in this podcast. Push everything we just said completely out of your brain. I don't want you to think about it anymore. What we're actually talking about is improv on the big screen, like the origins of it, where it's come from, where it is going, and what's the state of improv these days? Because there was an era of filmmaking in particular, where improv was the thing.
It was the thing for a while there,
and then it would bleed into YouTube and everything. What everybody was talking about was all these outtakes and deleted scenes that were all improv based.
Yeah,
we all have our favorite anecdotes of like on-screen improv. So Whose Line Is It Anyways aside, give me your favorite.
One of my favorites is apparently in Parks and Recreation. There's a moment where Chris Pratt kind of ad-libs a line.
Leslie, I typed your symptoms into the thing up here, and it says you could have network connectivity problems.
And I thought that was just such a great line. And apparently he improvised it on the spot, and even like the writers in interviews were like, damn it. Damn it. That is so good that we're angry we didn't come up with that.
I want to pull up a Parks and Rec scene. This isn't necessarily one of my favorites of like all time.
Is it the Kim Kardashian one?
No, but which is an outstanding one.
Which I don't think we can even. It's pretty inappropriate.
I'll wipe and I'll wipe and I'll wipe and I'll wipe 100 times. Still poop. Still poop.
Let me check that.
It's like I'm wiping a marker or something.
I mean, it's so It's amazing how poop and fart jokes, they're timeless.
Classic.
You really
classic
can't go wrong.
comedy.
When in doubt, just drop one and you'll be fine.
So an interesting thing about that, though, is that it's very possible that he improv that line, but shows like that will also have writers on set that on the day come up with like alt lines, and then they feed them to them just before shooting. They're like, all right, say this one, say this one, say this one. And then I think on this show, they also they give him the liberty to try some of his own. So I don't know which category that
was like an original
poop marker falls into.
It's definitely all a form of improv. I mean, it's just the writers have to improv.
Yeah, and then in editing, they choose whichever one is the funniest.
Let's hit some other iconic ones, because if you were to be asked what are the most popular or most famous ones, you think of 40-Year-Old Virgin, think of some Superbad. But I think if we look at some more classic examples, we also have to include Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now. Pretty much everything he said.
Really?
Yeah. He refused to say whatever the lines were that were in the script. He wanted to go, and that's why some of the best lines were just completely made up by him.
One of the things Francis said to Marlon from the beginning, read Heart of Darkness, this is what we're going for. And of course, after Francis had some dialogues with him, he realized that that Marlon had never read Heart of Darkness, and it was a complete shock.
I think we could put that one to bed there.
Classic improv, refusing to do your job.
This kind of bleeds into the other episode we did about method acting and just being a jerk on set.
Yeah, hundreds of people standing around on set while you...
in the jungle. Yeah. Being like eaten alive by insects, money just spilling into the river.
And he's just like, I didn't read the book.
Why did he want to get into that boat? Here's another classic.
Why? Because I'm telling the truth? That makes me a
Because you know how that is to do to someone, and you don't got the balls to stand up to your friends and tell them that you're gonna like who you want to like.
Okay, what about you, you hypocrite?
You're telling me that's improvised?
Yep. It doesn't always have to be comedy. Improv can be super serious.
Well, cool.
It's a perfect example of where you can have these really powerful, meaningful scenes that don't have any comedy in them whatsoever. But we're here for the giggles. So let me take you down giggly lane.
He was the height of, take two of you together, that's how tall he was.
Like 18 feet tall?
I think of Superbad.
Yeah.
When I think of improv. I also think of 40-Year-Old. Do we want to do another one?
Sure.
We want to do one more?
I think I was with a Korean girl once.
What was her name?
Shun-Li.
So those were clips from, we watched some Apocalypse Now, we watched some Breakfast Club, then we went to something a bit lighter and watched some Superbad and ended on some 40-Year-Old Virgin. These are all incredibly iconic films, and in many cases have some of the most well-known improv scenes. For a while, improv comedies, they dominated what we watched all the time. It's like from the late 90s until the 20-teens. Is that how you say that?
I don't know. 2010s.
I heard somebody say the 20-aughts is the...
I don't like that at all.
I hate it.
I'm going to be honest.
I hate it so much.
I hate that.
So the 2010s?
Sure. Yeah, that's what I feel.
You're right, the 10s. And then and now it's the 20s?
Yeah.
Okay. So from the late 90s to the mid 2010s. I'm just saying the 2010s.
Yeah, that's good.
That's all there was. It's like
pretty much
it really dominated all of filmmaking.
It was the APATOW generation. Well, I mean, mid 2000s to mid 2010s,
and we saw a lot of the careers of these famous folk get launched there. Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill, Jason Segel, Will Ferrell, Paul Rudd, Steve Carell, Kristen Wiig. Although I would argue that Will Ferrell started prior to that in SNL, but his film career, which really took him to the next level,
it really took off with Anchorman.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
But in the last 5 years, things have slowed down, Ryan.
That's
Where
true.
have all the comedies gone?
I would love to know.
It's not just it's not fair to say comedies in general, although I would say that there are fewer.
There absolutely
are
less comedies, definitely in theaters.
Yeah.
There's some Netflix stuff.
I was going to say TV has Netflix and Amazon Prime's got its thing going, have dominated the comedy scene in recent years.
Yeah, as opposed to movie theaters for sure.
But what is being made now is drastically different from 40-Year-Old Virgin, or that formula.
That formula, it definitely doesn't seem to be working anymore. There hasn't been a...
The riffing back and forth, trying to one-up each other.
They used to call that like line-orama sometimes, like on the DVD menus, they'd be like line-orama, and it was just like every alternate line that they tried.
That makes so much sense to call it that. I like that name a lot.
I don't think people are as into it as they used to be.
Definitely
for sure.
not.
Over the past couple of years, there's been a few comedies have really tried that format. And name a classic comedy movie from the past 5 years.
That's a
tough question.
That's a tough question. I mean, like, I feel like I have to go with something that Kevin Hart has done.
Am I still black?
Yes.
It's like the only things that are getting made.
I don't want to say Jumanji is a classic.
Jumanji, the classic comedy 2017.
But that's what it is.
That's where comedy is going. They're almost like plopping it into other genres.
Why do you think that is?
I think part of it is I think people have gotten tired of the line-orama format. It's been imposed on people that were not improv comedians to begin with, but people responded so favorably to improv line-oramas back in the day that they just have anyone try to do it and they think that that's going to be funny. Like an example is 2016 Ghostbusters. That was just...
What a great movie.
A great classic.
The power of penny compels you!
That's a classic comedy from the past 5 years.
By the way, just quick disclaimer, we're going to state opinions in this podcast, and you don't have to agree with us. That's okay. If you don't agree with us, go and tell us in the comment section how wrong we are. We welcome it, please.
But as you're watching Ghostbusters 2016, you could kind of just tell that they just pointed the camera at someone, and they were like, all right, what do you got? Just alt line, just give me another line, give me another line, give me another line. And then they stitched together what they thought were the most outlandish lines.
Not necessarily the funniest, just the craziest.
Yeah, and what it ended up like, it felt like nobody was a character. Everyone was just a premise for lines.
So they're line machine.
Yeah, they run into this guy, and this guy has a weird thing about cats. So he's gonna have some one-liners about cats. So that didn't actually happen in the movie, but that's like the spirit. I erased most of it from my memory.
Yeah, you have to fill in the blanks with anything. If cats are the first thing you thought of,
and it just like it didn't work.
No,
I don't think I laughed once.
No, that was
in that whole
very unfunny movie, and considering it was meant to be a comedy,
yeah,
it was rough. I think you're right when you say something about the format becoming tired. And also them getting lazy with how they're presenting it.
Yeah.
And I think there's another part of that where a lot of the actors that were in those films went and got all serious. A perfect example is Steve Carell.
That's true.
Look at starting in 40-Year-Old Virgin, and now he's in The Morning Show, which is an incredibly serious show. And look at everything in between.
Yeah, the last comedy thing he did was probably Anchorman 2.
Let's take a little history lesson here. What do you say?
Okay. Is it going to be related to improv?
I hope so. I sincerely
World War II started.
1927. There was a movie called The Jazz Singer.
Oh, yeah.
This was actually the first film to have spoken words in it.
Yes.
Where it was like recorded while they were filming.
I think it was also, it aged horribly. Right? Because doesn't that movie have some
terrible racism?
Yes.
Oh, probably. Anyways, the point is, in between him singing, which was recordings, that's the way most movies were made at the time. They would just play recordings over the film, and they would add text for context.
Yeah.
Context, text. This film, they actually recorded his singing, and in between songs, he ad-libbed lines, and it blew people away. They were not prepared. He wasn't supposed to speak at all, but he just started doing it, and they went with it.
Wow, that movie really revolutionized a few things. It was the first talkie improvisational movie.
This is it.
Will you give me something? What? You'll never guess. Shut your eyes, Mama. Shut them for little Jackie. Oh, I'm going to steal something. I'll give it back to you someday, too. You see if I don't.
You can see where that had a very improvised, rough feel to it, which in this era was not something that was...
I like that the origins of improv in movies is, close your eyes, mama, see if I don't kiss you on the lips. We've come a long way.
We really have.
And she clearly wasn't informed of anything that was happening, that poor old woman.
She's just like looking at the director like, you didn't say there'd be words in this. Well, that's where it started. And so throughout the history of filmmaking, there's been tons of actors to go off script, but the types of improv comedies that we know to love, like that we've grown to love, all started with one very particularly famous show, Saturday Night Live. While it's not, I think, exclusively improv, obviously they have very set scenes and they do have lines. They do go off the rails a lot. And that's what sort of began to popularize the idea of things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they improvise at all on that show, although they do crack and sometimes like misread things. But the cast is full of improvisers that are able to work on the fly if something goes wrong.
It was that raw nature of these scenes that only could exist because of the actors that came from Second City, Upright Citizens Brigade, the Groundlings. These are famous improv houses, you would call them. It's where you go to learn to be funny.
Funny school.
Funny school. Let's watch a little SNL clip and for those that don't know what Saturday Night Live is.
You should be ashamed of yourselves.
That way you can pick up that hang in there poster you've been dying to get.
Nice one, Air 5.
Who put you up to this? What do you mean you're my wife? You know, I can pull it back a little if you like.
Fellas, you're gonna want that cowbell on the track.
So I guess the point is, it's not that SNL is improv. It's more that the people that make SNL great, when it is great, because it's not as great anymore as it once was, but the people that have made it great over the years are great because they got their start learning the improv fundamentals.
They are comfortable in a scene because of their improv training.
Their training, yeah. So let's talk about those fundamentals that they've learned. What makes improv improv? The golden rule is to never block or refuse anything, right? Always positive.
Yes, and.
So not even, you're right, not even just positive. You also have to facilitate the next thing.
Yeah, you got to be like, and also, that's just a long way of saying yes, and.
But let's illustrate how that wouldn't work, okay?
Okay. Hey, buddy, can you hand me that power drill? We need to finish this car if we want to go on that road trip and reenact the hit Britney Spears movie Crossroads.
I don't have a drill. I've never seen Crossroads, but that sounds bad.
Yeah, so that scene is dead. that has nowhere to go anymore.
There's nothing to do with that.
That makes me think there's this classic scene. I don't know if it's classic because I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's a show called Life is Little or something like that. It's with Ricky Gervais and Warwick Davis, and there's a scene that they have where Liam Neeson, playing himself, comes in and demands that he wants to do some improvisational comedy. And he just he blocks every attempt that they have at setting up a scene. If we could find the clip.
I've got it. Life's Too Short is what it is called.
Life's Too Short.
Okay, let's do some improvisational comedy.
I can't now, Liam.
It's a bad time. Let's do some improvisational comedy now. Knock, knock.
Come in.
Hello.
Oh, no, not you again.
I've never been here before.
Sorry, I thought because you're a hypochondriac, you would have been to the doctors before.
Don't presume. That's a backstory we didn't agree on beforehand.
So that's an example of not advancing the scene.
But where it's used as a very powerful tool when not improved.
Yeah.
Who were these people that learned all these rules of improv and brought them to SNL and helped take things to the next level? These are some names that I really like, by the way. Primarily because I'm old, and they're from an era, a bygone era. Bill Murray,
Classic.
Dan Aykroyd.
Classic.
Eddie Murphy.
Classic.
Chevy Chase.
Classique.
They all moved from SNL to the big screen in really impactful ways. Bill Murray being famous for his extremely straight-faced, deadpan improvs that he somehow makes seem completely effortless. These uncooperative, sarcastic guys like in Groundhog's Day or Ghostbusters is some Peter Venkman lines that are incredibly iconic and also completely improved.
For this young Cinderella who's come out of nowhere, he's got about 350 yards left. He's going to hit about a 5-iron, I expect, don't you think? He's got a beautiful backswing. That's, oh, he got all of that one.
So that was all made up.
I believe it. You would never see a scene like that one we just saw in Caddyshack in a mainstream comedy today.
0%
It's too
chance.
slow paced.
Too rough.
Yeah, and it's just a camera on Bill Murray for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
There would be someone else there with him being like, why are you doing that? And he'd be like, oh, and there'd be back and forth like that. And then someone get kicked in the nuts or something.
Well, speaking of, okay, so let's see where this is where Bill Murray, when he was in Lost in Translation, at one point he whispers something to Scarlett Johansson. Her reaction is terrific. And still to this day, he hasn't said what he whispered. I guess it's an example of how improv doesn't always have to be comedy.
Yeah, I wonder what he whispered, and I'm sure everyone else does. I hope that it was something ridiculous that doesn't make any sense in the context of the movie.
So SNL evolves into SNL films. The Blues Brothers, Coming to America, Stripes, Wayne's World, Night at the Roxbury, Tommy Boy. What are your thoughts on Tommy Boy, by the way?
Man, I feel like I'm just being exposed for all the movies I haven't seen.
Ooh. Well, but also I am dating myself by talking about all these classic comedies. I'm fairly confident that the majority of our audience is not going to have seen a lot of these or be in, I mean, maybe Wayne's World, but like.
I'm of the age of, like I've seen Night at the Roxbury and Superstar. Those came out when I was young and able to go see them.
Wayne's World and Tommy Boy were definitely before that era. They were important defining comedies. That's what, like, I think kicked off the comedy era of film, when it was like a gold rush where everybody could come out with comedies that would really push the limits of what was socially acceptable. Wayne's World had some crazy scenes. We're not quite at improv yet, or like the form of improv that we know, but we know the improv greats got their start in film. And then what really kicked it off was Freaks and Geeks. Are you familiar with this show?
Yes, I have seen that show.
Ooh, wee.
Yes. Hey.
Nice.
You're a perv and a loser and a stinky turd.
Without Freaks and Geeks, we would not have the improv era that we are going to dive into. So let me tell you a little bit about Freaks and Geeks. Freaks and Geeks started in 1999, created by Judd Apatow. Written by Paul Feig?
I always hear different versions. Feig. Who funny enough did 2016 Ghostbusters.
Yes.
Oh, hell no, the devil is a liar!
And produced by Judd Apatow. It's like meant to be like the comedy Beverly Hills 90210. High school kids getting into zany situations, but it relied super heavily on improv. It pretty much launched the careers of Seth Rogen, James Franco, Jason Segel. Without this show, they would have not been, or at least not been as famous as they were.
Probably not. They certainly teamed up with Judd Apatow from there on out.
Yeah, that literally was like the beginning of a dozen team-ups.
Yeah, it definitely felt more real than, say, like 90210. The actors that were cast were cast to actually look like high school students, like they were actually of the age.
And that was one thing, like Judd Apatow would ask the actors to go off script, to try and figure out how those characters would react and how they would actually behave in those situations.
Yeah.
So that it was more believable. So yeah, that was sort of the key, that then when Judd Apatow went and started getting all these crazy movie deals, he brought all his friends with him, which is really nice because Freaks and Geeks was canceled after one season.
Yeah.
And that led to, which you mentioned a moment ago, Anchorman.
That was like, I think that was, at least on the big screen. You know, Freaks and Geeks and Whose Line? They're both TV shows.
Yeah.
But the movies used to be shot on film, Some still are, and that makes it super expensive to
just roll,
to just try things. I don't know how Judd Apatow managed to convince the studio to let him do that on Anchorman, but he did. Not only did he do a bunch of improv, but he also, there's an entire movie that they shot first and that they didn't think was good enough, and so they remade a movie. I think it's on YouTube. It's called
Wake Up Ron Burgundy, the Lost Movie.
So I don't know how he managed to do that. I don't know. I don't understand how Judd Apatow was able to convince studio heads to keep giving him money.
If he did it first and it sucked, he's like, trust me, give me all the same money again.
Yeah, I got this.
I'm going to do it this time. 2004 Anchorman completely changes the game.
I'm going to punch you in the ovary. That's what I'm going to do. A straight shot.
Ooh, ow.
Right to the baby maker.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think of when I think of improv in movies. Yeah. I definitely think of that guy.
Lines, just one after the other.
They must have hours. It must have been so expensive.
Yeah.
So just in case people are wondering why it's expensive, film, like actual film in a camera, costs a lot of money. Yep. Whereas now on digital, it's easy. Just roll forever. You run out of batteries, just swap batteries, recharge the old batteries, and you're good to go.
Swap out the memory card.
Memory cards.
Film has to be processed. It has to be developed. It costs a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
On a low budget thing, you can't just try things out.
Only works on a blockbuster.
Yeah, you need millions.
So Anchorman, written by Adam McKay and Will Ferrell, who had been working together on SNL. They were SNL buddies. And that's what it was. What did you call it before? The Line-orama?
Yeah.
That's what this was.
Yeah, 100%.
It was, let's set up a scene, let's set up a camera, let's not move the cameras, and just have them fire off lines to each other. So from Anchorman, it was off to the races. For the next 10 years, this whole group of comedians, they dominated everything. You had Will Ferrell and Adam McKay came up with Step Brothers, Blades of Glory, Talladega Nights, Walk Hard.
Walk Hard is great.
All hilarious films.
Did you hear that? I'm Dewey's 12-year-old girlfriend.
Judd Apatow went on to do Knocked Up, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Funny People, Get Him to the Greek, and Bridesmaids.
This is the 90s.
Right. It's not. You're in the wrong decade.
Yeah, all things with a ton of improv.
They crushed. All of those films, they crushed. Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, they went and they did their thing. They made Superbad, Pineapple Express, This Is the End.
The power of Christ compels you.
Oh, does it? Does it compel me?
The title kind of has like a double meaning in the sense of like, not only is, yes, it's a movie about the apocalypse, but they also kind of felt like this is the end of that era where they are dominating with these kinds of comedies, you know? And there hasn't really been one of those since then with all that gang.
I never even really thought about that.
That was pretty much the end.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. You're right. I hadn't thought about that. And it's true that it seems like that was a very symbolic end. So that was that era. At the same time, there was something else that was going on in another part of the world. Do you remember Sacha Baron Cohen? That was like right in the heart of that era. Ali G Show started in 2000. I mean, he was straight through the 2000s to the 2010s.
Yeah, Borat was a phenomenon in 2006, 2007, I want to say.
And this was like a form of cringe improv.
Can I say first, we support your war of terror.
Do you want to talk about people trying to quote films or trying to recreate scenes? Everybody, my grandparents included, were talking like Borat.
My wife.
How many times did somebody say my wife?
You can't say my wife anymore in the real world.
My wife, Oksana, she's a boring.
You have to be like, this is my spouse, all right?
This is my spouse. Yeah.
Saying very nice how much.
But he didn't start on Borat. It was Ali G Show that kicked that off.
Yeah, on HBO.
Dumb interview, cringe interview style.
Yeah.
And he just nailed it. He asked the best questions. He put these people in the most uncomfortable situations that exposed their true selves. But he did it, so much of it was just him going with it and feeling the person out and trying to
there's even
see how cringy he can get it.
There's a clip of him pitching a product to Donald Trump back in the day.
Oh, goodness. And so Borat, for example, even though it was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay at the 2006 Oscars, it was entirely unscripted.
How is that an adapted screenplay?
I know. 400 hours of Borat was actually shot. 400 hours.
Wow. See that? Yeah, that's what's possible when you're not shooting on film.
Yep.
And those shot on like video.
And aside from the scene with Pamela Anderson, everyone that he was filmed with had no idea.
Yeah.
Until they had to sign release forms.
Yeah, that's always the moment.
Which is super crucial on a shoot, shoot like that, where you're literally making people insanely uncomfortable. Here, let's tee up some Ali G real quick.
Oh, there it is. And what is the problem with ice cream?
I have no idea.
It drips.
Okay.
So my idea is what?
Need to make a drip-proof ice cream.
No. Oh, that's a brilliant idea. All right, whatever. You ain't gonna come out with that, though.
No, I promise you I won't.
Okay, then things started to go downhill. By 2014, we're talking now, the momentum of the improv comedy started to dwindle, started to slow down. Anchorman 2, you ever see that one?
I did. Yeah, I saw it a couple times. Yeah, it wasn't as special.
Isn't it amazing how it could go from being like such an impactful film to...
They tried to recreate something that they clearly made just off the cuff kind of thing back in the day. And we had been saturated with that kind of thing for well over a decade at that point. So
there's a bunch of them. The Campaign.
Right. Yeah. I forgot about that one.
Get Hard.
Yeah. Didn't see that.
Daddy's Home.
I recently rewatched a movie called Wanderlust from 2012 with Paul Rudd and Jennifer Aniston.
I know this film.
It had a lot of improv in it, and it was actually very, very funny. I like that one a lot, but no one went to see it.
Right.
It bombed.
Yes, because it was already starting. The market had been so saturated that people just didn't care as much. That was the case with a lot of these others. They tried to just recapture that. They tried to just keep repeating the same recipe with diminishing returns each time.
And another thing that I think has kind of led to the decline of comedy in theaters is around that time, YouTube and stuff started really picking up, and Instagram, and people, for laughs, it's not that, you don't have to go very far to get a laugh anymore. You just open up YouTube, open up Instagram. And,
head on down to youtube.com/screenrant, tune into any episode of Pitch Meeting, and you get yourself a bunch of laughs right there.
Wow. Well, I wasn't doing those in 2012, but...
No, I'm saying now.
Yeah, okay, yeah, do it now. Close this, do that,
and then come back to this and tell us what you learned.
But yeah, I feel like the appetite for silliness is
these films were becoming saturated and redundant.
Yeah. And
the films themselves weren't really about anything special. They didn't have good stories. They didn't have, like you said about Anchorman, it didn't have any story. That recipe, it was very rare that there was some meaningful message being conveyed aside from just the line-oramas. You know, so
yeah, so which you could get the line-oramas on YouTube. So
you can get it all on YouTube now.
Yeah.
And people were pumping out that, like, how many Vine accounts came out in the mid 2010s that were just the exact same joke repeated 100 times over, but slightly differently.
Vine ruined sketch comedy.
Ruined line-oramas.
It ruined a lot of things. It ruined so many things.
So sure, a lot of these movies, they all had great lines in them, and there were some very hilarious jokes, but none of them really stood out because there was nothing to back it up. There was no real story there or anything meaningful behind it. It wasn't like there was great cinematography or the music didn't stand out. Did these movies even have music?
Yeah, and even if there was a great story, if it's in a comedy, people are, you know, if they're just going to a comedy to laugh, then they don't need to go. They don't need the story. They just need the laugh, and they could get the laugh much easier now.
This sums it up. This clip right here sums it up.
You know, I know you're gay. You just told me you're not sleeping with women anymore.
You know how I know that you're gay?
How? Because you're gay and you can tell who other gay people are?
You know how I know you're gay?
How?
You like Coldplay.
So that scene, and then they carried that joke, you know how I know you're gay joke. They carried it into another, it's Knocked Up. They do the exact same joke again, the two of them.
I know you're gay.
How?
You trim your beard.
I do trim my beard.
If they're doing the same joke across multiple movies, it's like there's nothing to it, you know? But nowadays, there's so many movies and so many things to watch, to pay money to go to the theater to watch the same jokes again. without there being more substance to it, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and I also think it's like, as with pretty much everything in Hollywood, it always, when something works, it becomes, they drive it into the ground until it doesn't anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And over the course of the years, it became very quickly too much of a good thing. And it's not, it used to be fun to like watch a scene and be like, oh, that looked like he came up with that on the spot. But by like 2013, 2014, we're so used to that. And it's not a novel thing anymore. It's like, yeah, oh yeah, that's something that happens, and it's not as funny, as it loses the impact.
I agree. So then let's talk about what does give a movie longevity, because now it's obviously not just the improv or not just the bouncing lines around. And you actually shared this with me originally, and I loved it. You shared with me a video it was a video essay about Edgar Wright's style of filmmaking.
Yes, from Every Frame a Painting.
Oh man, what a great channel.
Yeah.
R.I.P. But they did a great video essay that talks about Edgar Wright and his style of filmmaking that is so hilarious, but it's such a different feeling to the comedy. It's such a different vibe. So Edgar Wright is the creator of incredibly successful films like Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz. These are incredibly stylized comedies where every single frame is a painting.
Yeah, well, oh, that's what his channel meant.
Every single scene is very deliberately set up.
That's the word, deliberate.
And
absolutely.
Everything from the music to the shot composition to the way the actors move in the scene is so intentional, and the comedy is told with all of those elements rather than it just being a punchline. It's all these other aspects that help accentuate a punchline.
When's your birthday? Out!
He wasn't the first to do this. There were some other classic films, or what are regarded as classic films, that did the same idea. Spinal Tap. It also used improv, but very deliberate scenes. It was a mockumentary style, so where everything was really established and deliberate in the storytelling. But when it came to just delivering the lines, that's where the improv came into place.
Right.
So it was interesting because it's almost like splitting the difference between Edgar Wright's super deliberate, stick to the lines, everything's got to be perfectly on beat, to just riff with it and see where it goes. But we know you need to stay within this contained box. And the only thing that was improv was every single line delivered. But it was one of those, like, just set up a scene and go for it.
Yeah.
Because this is a Spinal Tap, and this is all improv.
The numbers all go to 11. Look, right across the board. You're on 10 on your guitar. Where can you go from there? Where? One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
Because it felt very raw and rough around the edges.
For sure.
And that was the charm of it. That's what gave it that documentary, mockumentary style. Which I guess then bring it back to Borat. Borat's exactly that as well. But so think about Anchorman and all those other APATOW eras. Can you tell me anything about how those were made? Like editing, cinematography, music selection?
It's pretty much all just tripod and you talk for a while.
Interesting. While we were watching the clips of Anchorman, I'm seeing the scenes, and I'm like, I know these scenes and I know the things that he says, but like what he's wearing and the backgrounds and all of those things, I don't really remember, and how the scene was composed or who was sitting where. I'm like, this looks foreign to me, but I know the scene so well. It's such an interesting feeling, because like when you think of other iconic film scenes or memorable film scenes, you can so often know it. Like there's so many Star Wars scenes, for example. I know exactly how those scenes are laid out. Exactly. I know what everybody's wearing and the music that's playing. Movies like Anchorman, 40-Year-Old Virgin, they don't have that same thing.
Yeah. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just, it's a completely different way of delivering comedy. It's focused on dialogue and the funniest person in the room.
Wait a second. Is Judd Apatow a fraud?
No.
Because I guess he had to discover them.
At the end of the day, his movies are about something, especially throughout the years. Judd Apatow produced things. Some of them almost feel like dramas.
Yeah.
Like Trainwreck. The trailer is a comedy, but the movie is it's very serious about family and stuff. And the movie Funny People with Adam Sandler
is very serious at times.
Extremely serious at times.
So I guess that's where things are going, though, is that a little bit more the Spinal Tap route. Because lately we've seen somebody step into the ring, not John Cena, who makes some great comedies, and they are like walking that line of improv / structured filmmaking. And the man's name is Taika Waititi.
He's great.
What a guy.
So good.
What We Do in the Shadows?
One of my favorite movies.
Hunt for the Wilder People.
Also.
And then more recently, Thor, Ragnarok.
And Jojo Rabbit.
And Jojo Rabbit most recently. I haven't seen that yet. He's awesome. And he definitely, like, you could feel it the most in What We Do in the Shadows.
Look, a ghost cop.
We know what the scenes are meant to be, but all the lines are very rough and improv, and they kind of like step on each other's lines a bit and cut each other off, and it's kind of awkward at times.
Yeah, which goes with the mockumentary style.
And that's what gives it its charm.
Yeah.
But it is a hilarious movie, and he's also just not afraid to do drama.
Oh, this guy's a lunatic. Oh, look at that psycho. He's going to get us all killed.
Jojo Rabbit had some emotional scenes.
Were there?
Yeah.
I imagine that would be a film. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say, but I feel like it would be much more serious in nature.
It's very lighthearted the whole time, but then that almost makes like the moment that much more impactful.
Filmmaking isn't always just about comedy, but improv has been used as a tool for a long time to convey dramatic, sad, or otherwise scenes, like we talked about
with Marlon Brando.
We talked about Marlon Brando a moment ago,
who seemed to insist to improvise his lines,
even though these people went out of their way to write him such a nice long script. But there's other people that there's other directors and creators that lean on this more heavily than others. Robert Altman is an example. He's a 5-time nominee for Best Director at the Academy Awards. His whole thing was making more naturalistic films, but they also had that like stylized filmmaking way of doing things in Hollywood that aren't necessarily as common in improv. Large ensembles in these films, and it's a lot about the actors overlapping and talking on top of each other and things like that. Most famous for MASH, Nashville, The Player, and many, many more.
So this is an older thing.
His famous quote was, "Have you brought your scripts?" And we said yes. And he said, "Well, throw them away. You don't need them."
Such a cheesy sounding.
You need to know who you are and where you are and who you're with.
He sounds like the cool substitute teacher.
Yeah. Do you have your books? Throw them away. So we're going from like sad improv, and then to there's another form called mumblecore. Are you familiar with mumblecore?
Yeah, this feels like that would be a part of mumblecore.
So mumblecore was like the way that it was described to be is that made the most sense was it's as if like all these famous people made a movie on no budget.
Right. Yeah.
So making it unscripted was most of the times necessary. Let's do this. Let's do a trailer right here of mumblecore.
I don't know if I was supposed to. Are you guys married? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well, we didn't have a
Big
plan.
time.
Well, it's crazy. Congratulations.
That really felt like a student film.
Isn't that crazy? That it like had accolades?
It looked and sounded like a student film that somehow got wide distribution.
It like the definition of feeling raw.
Well, I mean, it did look like it had zero budget, and I'm sure it did. Which props to them for making a movie with no money,
a full movie.
Yeah,
that seemed to have a story. But yeah, it felt super rough, and so that's where you take something that has just a little bit of script and you just let it go.
So that's really
that's mumblecore. Okay, and then that takes us to our final example, which is no script at all. 2014's The One I Love, starring Mark Duplass and Elizabeth Moss. It had an outline, but no actual script.
Yeah.
That's nuts. To perform all those scenes and still be able to stick to a story, but also be a director and be able to track that your story is being...
And also improvising, but making it feel like a real person.
Yeah. Well, and so that's... Elizabeth Moss said that the improv was about making the characters feel as real as possible.
Is that bacon?
Yeah.
You hate it when I eat bacon.
So all this no scripting can lead to some very cool things. There's a film that came out in 2014, a sci-fi film called Coherence, and that was entirely improvised.
Wow.
Entirely.
A sci-fi film.
Yeah, right? I feel like that's a tough thing to do. The actors were given like papers with directions and motivations for their characters at the beginning of each day, and then that was it. And there's a lot of other famous improv moments that you know of that we're not even thinking about. You talking to me?
You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking to? Talking to me?
Right, and the I'm walking here.
And then, of course, there's like every scene from every Robin Williams film ever made.
I do a great impression of a hot dog.
He really was insane.
He was great.
He was perfectly insane. So what about the exact opposite? Like we talked about Edgar Wright before. What about the films that like you have to stick to the script? The directors that will not let you deviate at all. So that's Noah Baumbach.
Yeah.
He like is not about improv in any way, shape, or form.
Which is funny because his movies feel super improvised. The dialogue overlaps constantly. It feels very off the cuff, but it's all very, very, very intentional.
It's like he's just about sticking to the guns. He thinks that sticking to his guns, or sticking to his script more accurately, is allowing more freedom, he thinks, because instead of thinking about what they're going to say next, it allows the actors to really stay in the moment and listen to each other and get into that scene, immerse themselves better.
Interesting.
It is interesting because it's almost like it makes me think of the Anchorman scenes where, granted, they are mostly two people or more talking to each other, but it really is about their individual performances and what they're going to say and who's standing out from those scenes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not nearly as much about working as a dynamic or with each other.
Yeah.
Quentin Tarantino also does the same thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's so known for his dialogue that if someone changes things, then he's like, well, that's not mine. That's not my dialogue. Now, take your shoes off, because he likes feet. You guys don't?
It's true. There's every single one of these films is some weird foot scene. Okay, so let's so now, okay, we've talked about what it is and where it's come from and all these things. Let's talk about the pros and the cons here. So pros, it gives you the freedom to just go for it, to explore, to have fun, to do crazy things that you wouldn't otherwise have discovered. And it really lets people like Will Ferrell or Steve Carell show that genius.
Mm-hmm.
But the cons is that it allows directors to get lazy. It's a very mean thing to say.
It's just like, it's not, you can't do anything with the camera because you might miss the thing that's being improvised.
Yeah. So it relies on the actors to carry the movie instead of being creative. And as we've seen, it can get old. I mean, a decade isn't so fast, but it's not a crazy long time. And as a result, like the stories have fell to the side in favor of these individual scenes. And to me, then some of the stories being told are not nearly as memorable. Those are the cons. So I guess maybe a happy medium is a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Taika Waititi.
Taika Waititi. He's our Lord and Savior.
Taika Waititi.
He's the only one that can show us the way. Here's an interesting thing. So going back to Noah Baumbach for a second, Danny McBride, who spent so many of his projects being like strictly improv.
Yeah, absolutely.
He credits Noah Baumbach for seeing the way. After seeing the movie Frances Ha, which is a Baumbach film, he realized that once he realized that none of that movie was made up, that everything was scripted, he decided that this is how he wanted to act. So this is the end, was almost his end of that as well. And this is the thought process that he put behind his new show, The Righteous Gemstones. Have you watched any of that?
It's a great show. Yeah, I watched the whole thing.
I have not seen the whole thing, but I do like everything that I have seen so far.
That's how Jesus Christ. Smooth movements. You get that? You see how that worked? Yeah.
Really smooth movement?
Nobody's coughing, no water's coming out, nobody's nose. Did you just splash me?
No, I don't know who's
You splashing me?
I don't know who's splashing.
Do it again, just see what I do.
Y'all stop that. Stop that cuff and keep these lines moving.
Tell him he's the one splashing people.
I'm not splashing nobody.
So it's interesting that, like, yeah, I think that what we're seeing today are more examples like that of films, or actually more so shows now, that are relying on a little bit of both, you know, focus more on telling a good story and having all the good elements of filmmaking. And if and when you can sprinkle in some improv to help make a scene better, then go for it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's where we'll be moving along now.
Let's see what's to come.
I'm excited. I would like to see more films.
More comedy films?
Yeah.
Or more just like improvised films, or
no, just comedy films in general.
Yeah.
You said it best. What was the last one we came up with? Ghostbusters? You know, original comedy ideas, not using the same recipe every time.
I think the key thing is like movies should be about something.
Yep. Well said.
Instead of being just an opportunity to show off some improv skills.
Should be about something rather than being about people, individuals.
Yeah, about the actors or the comedians. It should be.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. We appreciate you. Appreciate you so much. We hope to see you again in the next one. Any last words?
Oh my God.
Put that gun away.
No. Great.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.